Well, thanks very much for coming to talk to us today, Congressman Biggs. I appreciate it. You've got a lot to, you're busy, so I'm glad you could squeeze us in.
Grant, I'm glad to be with you.
All right, well, thank you. Well, what I'd like to just focus on is Asian security, and get your input on a few things. The first thing, sir, is I noticed that you sponsored a resolution saying that the PRC, China, is the greatest foreign threat to U.S. peace, security, and stability. And this actually ties in with what Admiral Studeman, the head of intelligence at Indo-PACOM, said just the other day when he was giving a pretty blood-curdling assessment of Chinese capabilities. So could you tell us, or tell our listeners, what you had in mind with the resolution? How do you see things, sir, in Asia?
I look at everything from cybersecurity as a huge issue. I look at the deep water Navy that they've put together. I look at rocket telemetry that they now exceed us in my opinion.
Yeah.
I look at the fact that they have satellites, the fact that they've moved to Mars. All of that comes together, a massive army, and then they're stealing our technology as well. So economic, basically adversaries, military adversaries, the bellicosity that has come in the last 6 months, I think, since Trump left. I think Trump actually, he was the cowboy they couldn't understand what he might do and what he might not do. But there's certain bellicosity that's come up, including talks now about Taiwan again. The South China Sea, which I've been looking at for probably 25 years, and there are persons there. So when I see that, I don't see any other nation in the world that has been consistently pushing the envelope regionally and ultimately internationally, and that's what I meant by the resolution.
Yeah, it's I think as bad as you say it is, sir. I think in 1989, after Tiananmen Square massacre, the Chinese Communist Party leadership gave the orders to the PLA, the military, figure out how to defeat a country that has aircraft carriers, which is it's a very short list of them.
That's right.
And it was talking about us. What do you think we should do? You know, because there's I would note, sir, that the U.S. hasn't always been aligned on what it should do, and you also have, say, our financial community, our business communities, which seem to advocate a soft approach on China.
And so I think the first thing we have to do, in my opinion, is we've got to control cybersecurity. That is huge because we can get wiped out very easily with cybersecurity. I think that we also have to play. I'm not a big multilateral institution fan. They've not really taken our side. The WTO has not been good to us vis-a-vis China, for instance. The international environmental courts have not been good to us vis-a-vis China as well. But I do think that there is a way to balance against China and ultimately Russia. I don't think we should antagonize Russia necessarily, but I look at India as a place that we align ourselves with that has a natural antipathy with cross-border disputes with China on a regular basis. I look at Vietnam, who has had cross-border disputes with China, and I look at that tremendous arc that goes from Northeast Asia to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all the way through. Has twice as many people as China, has a GDP that's actually bigger than China. And if you can bring stability in those regions, you can actually balance against China. And then I think you have to basically respond with, you have to move back to some list like they used to have in the Cold War era. You have to almost, I don't want to say elevate this to a Cold War, but you have to prevent trade in some ways to an adversary. I think a lot of people look at them and say, well, they're a trade opponent. I don't view them that way, and it's been a long time that I have not viewed them that way. I view them as an aggressive, long-term adversary militarily. We need to bring back production of items to the United States of America, of components that go into our most sophisticated weaponry.
Yeah.
And so there's some basic things that a rational person on both sides of the aisle should say, oh yeah, we should do that. And that's just a very 30,000 foot level. I think there are other things we can do as well.
Well, you said, sir, that there's agreement on some things on both sides of the aisle.
I said there should be.
Okay, well, you're correct. How much agreement is there towards a firmer stance towards China?
I think that we can begin to get people together on things such as cybersecurity. I think because everybody recognizes cybersecurity is an immediate threat, because it can shut down an entire economy. It could shut down our weapons systems as well. So I think that's one of those areas where we can get some accord across the aisle. From there, you're going to have to nibble a little bit. But I do think that I'm still a big believer that into balancing, and we need to reach out and see where we can align ourselves with some of these nations. I think there's a good move to bring Australia and New Zealand back in closer to us. I think that's important. I think we should try to get the Philippines closer to us. I think this is ridiculous. The Belt and Road path China is doing. I mean, the prime example is Sri Lanka. China finances this tremendous harbor. Sri Lanka can't pay it back. China now basically controls the harbor, and as a result, they control much of what happens in Sri Lanka.
What about Japan, sir? I think you know Japan pretty well. What kind of a role does it have to play in sort of stabilizing sort of the free world in Asia?
Well, Japan has a major role. I mean, they've actually, in the last 20 years, loosened the interpretation of Article 9 of their Constitution, which is you can't have a military. So that's been interesting to watch. 25 years ago, when I was doing graduate work, I wrote that they would not be incentivized to do much in that way, and they haven't been, because they can free ride on the United States. So as long as you can free ride on the United States, they're going to stay in that. They're dependent on that path, and they're comfortable with that path. Although there's more agitation today than there was 25 years ago to change that. But Japan has got to, in my opinion, have a total rapprochement with South Korea. South Korea and Japan can form this balancing of economies that is critical both against North Korea and China. And Japan is going to have to be the leader there, I think. They're going to have to let go of some hubris or some pride or whatever, and they do in some respects, but I think that it can work. But it looks to me like sometimes, I was just back in Japan a year ago. I met with some of their delegates, and then I met with some Korean delegates too. It just seems to me that there's a gap that needs to be closed there, and they need to close that. When they start closing that, I think that'll be a little bit more of a caution for China.
It does sort of bring to mind the Irish and the English. But what role does the U.S. have, sir, in bringing the Japanese and the South Koreans together?
I think we should facilitate some of the discussions that have to take place, where we should be working with them, even if it's separately, to find the areas of agreement. Bridge the gaps that are otherwise there. Bring the agreement together. You're never going to get a perfect relationship with any nation, two nations in the world. But find where we can get it together.
It was interesting that just recently, off Australia, the U.S. Navy, the Australian Navy, the Japanese Navy, and the South Korean Navy all did a joint exercise. So there is room for progress. It's, of course, the English and the Irish, but that said, sometimes you have to,
you don't want to wait until it is so late that it's rushed, it's incomplete, and it takes so long to recover what should have been done preliminarily. And that's when I get back to talking about what people like Winston Churchill were saying as early as 31, 32, and he was ignored largely. I get it. The British at that time wanted to, they were pacifistic. They didn't want to rearm. But Churchill said, well, we got to at least maintain some superiority here. And then when it became almost too late, they had to absorb a lot of punishment for failure to plan and take care of those things when they could more easily and more cheaply. I would say that may be where we are.
So one last question, sir. You'd mentioned the administration that it discombobulated China, and in my probably been watching it 40 years or so, and you probably about the same. And this was the first administration that I can think of that actually did the right thing when it came to a China policy. You know, give Matt Pottinger and Dave Stilwell a lot of credit for this. And how is this administration doing? And what would you like to see, or see continued or done differently?
So what this administration has done on virtually every international and domestic policy is quite frankly, unplugged the Trump era policies. And so I guess I was so pleased by what was happening with China under President Trump. Yeah. So I would say, first thing, I think you got to start leveraging again, whether it's sanctions, whether it's trade policy, whether it's the cybersecurity issues that you're going to, you know, if we've got companies that are facilitating their cybersecurity attacks on us, which I do believe we do have, we're going to have to prosecute them. I think you have to incentivize bringing companies back. You've seen the move China's making right now with regard to grabbing onto these corporations and trying to steer profits, etc., and keep them there, you know, put a stranglehold on them. We need to incentivize to bring them home, particularly components in military and other vital components that they're producing over there. We need to bring those back here. I think what Trump did, he was the cowboy, and he was the guy that was actually with his advisors. They were punishing China for their misdeeds. And I think there's another leverage there that's sitting out there that we don't take advantage of. China has they have a real estate bubble that is huge. They still have, I mean, I thought this was gone, but I was just reading recently that you still have massive high-rises that are sitting totally vacant. You have essentially shopping malls that are totally vacant. They've overbuilt tremendously. That should work to our advantage. The other thing I'd say is we got to quit giving them our sovereign debt. That's too much leverage point for an enemy. And when I say enemy, I'm talking about this country that wants to be, the CCP wants to be the global hegemon.
Well, they call us an enemy.
They view us as an enemy. And if the left hears me call them an enemy, they will go berserk. And if this gets into China, China will identify me by name. They've identified members of Congress by name who've spoken like I've spoken with you.
Well, they've been very clear. We just choose not to believe them.
That's right.
But I'm not being funny about it. Well, you'd know just as well as I that they must think we're very clever and have something up our sleeve that we're going to. But I appreciate you taking the time, sir, very much.
Thank you.